It was a warm afternoon when students gathered inside the school auditorium for the music class. The big piano stood at the center of the stage, its black surface shining under the soft lights. Everyone was talking and laughing, excited because the teacher had announced that each student would have to play something. Some were proud to show what they had practiced, while others were nervous. In the back row, a young lady sat quietly, her hands folded on her lap. She didn't talk much, and most students barely noticed her presence. To many, she seemed shy, maybe even uninterested. But in truth, there was something deeper behind her silence. The music teacher, known for being strict but fair, clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. She smiled and said, "All right, everyone. Today we'll see what you've learned. Each of you will take a turn at the piano. Don't worry if it's not perfect, this is just practice." The students clapped politely. Then the teacher began calling names one by one. One boy played a cheerful tune, missing a few notes but smiling confidently. Another girl performed a short piece from memory, earning a few cheers from her friends. The room was filled with energy, laughter, and music. As more students took turns, the quiet girl in the back began to feel her heart beat faster. She hoped silently that the teacher might forget her name. She wasn't ready for this. She didn't want to play. The piano meant something different to her. It carried memories too deep to share. Every note reminded her of someone she had lost, someone who had taught her what music really was. When the teacher called her name, the girl froze. The sound of her name echoed in her ears. Everyone turned to look at her. Some whispered, others smiled, thinking it would be funny to see the quiet one try to play. The teacher looked around, waiting for her to stand up. "Come on," the teacher said, gently but firmly. "It's your turn." The girl shook her head slightly. I can't," she whispered. But her voice was so soft that no one could hear clearly. The teacher frowned a little, thinking she was refusing out of fear. "Don't be shy," she said, her tone still kind but with a hint of authority. "Everyone is trying. Just come and do your best. That's all we ask." The girl lowered her eyes. The attention made her uncomfortable. She wasn't afraid of playing badly. She was afraid of what playing might awaken inside her. Still, the teacher waited and the class stared. It was one of those moments when silence feels heavier than words. Finally, one of the students in the front row laughed softly and said, "Maybe she doesn't even know how to play." A few others chuckled. The girl felt her cheeks burn. The teacher gave the class a sharp look to stop the laughter, but it was too late. The damage was done. The girl stood up slowly. She didn't want to draw attention, but she also didn't want the teacher to think she was being disrespectful. She walked toward the piano, her steps quiet but full of tension. Her hands trembled slightly. She could hear whispers behind her, but she tried to block them out. Her heart felt heavy as she approached the instrument that once brought her peace, but now only reminded her of loss. The teacher gave her an encouraging nod. "Take your time," she said. "We just want to hear you try." The girl sat on the bench staring at the keys. Her reflection stared back faintly from the polished surface. She touched the edge of the piano, feeling the cool wood beneath her fingers. She hadn't played in a long time, not since that day when everything changed. For a brief moment, her mind drifted to the past. She could almost see a small living room filled with sunlight, a gentle hand guiding hers over the keys, a warm voice saying, "Let the music speak, don't force it." That voice belonged to someone she missed more than words could say. But she blinked and the memory faded. The auditorium was waiting. The teacher crossed her arms and smiled, though a little impatiently. "Anytime you're ready," she said softly. The students leaned forward, eager to see what would happen. The girl took a deep breath and pressed a single key. The sound was soft, trembling, almost like a whisper. She hesitated, unsure if she should continue. A few students exchanged glances. The teacher's smile remained, but her eyes revealed curiosity. Then the girl removed her hands from the piano and said quietly, "I really can't." The teacher sighed. "You can. You just have to try." She wasn't angry, just determined. Music is not about perfection, it's about courage. But the girl shook her head again. The words didn't comfort her. The thought of playing in front of everyone felt too heavy. The piano wasn't just an instrument to her. It was a doorway to emotions she wasn't ready to open. She sat still, her hands resting in her lap as if frozen between past and present. The class grew restless. Some students whispered that she was wasting time. Others felt sorry for her. The teacher hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to insist or let her go. But before she could decide, the head of the music department entered the room. He was an older man, kind but serious, with a deep love for music. He saw the girl sitting there and asked, "Is everything all right?" The teacher explained that the student was too shy to play. The man looked at the girl and smiled gently. "Do you like music?" he asked. The girl nodded. "Then let it help you," he said softly. Music never judges. Something about his tone made her heart soften. He wasn't forcing her. He was inviting her. She looked at the piano again, then at her trembling hands. The class waited quietly. The laughter was gone. Even the teacher seemed unsure what to expect now. The young lady took another deep breath. Her fingers moved toward the keys again. She didn't press them yet, just rested her hands there, feeling the smooth surface. Her heart beat faster, but this time it wasn't fear, it was something else. Maybe it was longing. Maybe it was love. Then, quietly, she pressed one note. It was the same note her mother used to start with. The sound filled the room, simple but pure. It wasn't much, but it was honest. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was being forced. She felt like she was remembering. The music department head smiled. "There you go," he said softly. "One note at a time." She played another, then another. The teacher watched in surprise. The girl wasn't playing a song, just touching random keys softly like she was trying to remember how it felt. But each sound carried emotion. The students were silent now. They didn't laugh anymore. There was something about the way she touched the piano, something almost sacred. After a few seconds, she stopped again. She looked down, her eyes slightly wet. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I can't play more today." The teacher nodded gently. "That's all right," she said, her voice softer than before. "Thank you for trying." The head of the department didn't speak. He simply looked at her with understanding. He had seen many students play perfectly, but very few had touched the piano with such feeling. Even in those few hesitant notes, he sensed something special, a depth that couldn't be taught. The girl stood up slowly, her head bowed, and returned to her seat. The class remained quiet for a few moments. Then the teacher called the next student to perform. The laughter returned, but it wasn't as loud as before. Something had changed in the room. The girl sat quietly again, staring at her hands. Deep down, she knew she couldn't hide from music forever. It was a part of her, even if it hurt to remember. That day, no one realized what they had just witnessed. A spark, faint but real, from someone who carried more talent and emotion than anyone in that room could imagine. For now it was hidden, locked behind quiet eyes and a trembling heart. But someday soon the world would hear the music she kept inside. The next morning, the young lady walked through the school gates with her head slightly lowered. The memory of the previous day still lingered in her mind. She could still feel the weight of all those eyes watching her. The sound of the whispers, the quiet laughter that stung more than she wanted to admit. Even though the teacher had been kind afterward, the moment had left her heart uneasy. She had touched the piano for the first time in years, and it had brought back both warmth and pain. As she walked down the hall, some students smiled at her, while others just stared with curiosity. They hadn't expected anything from her before, but now, there was something about her that made them wonder. She ignored their looks and quietly made her way to her first class. But even as she tried to focus on her lessons, her thoughts kept drifting back to the piano. The sound of that single note she played still echoed in her ears. During lunch break, she sat under a tree behind the school, her lunch untouched. She closed her eyes and remembered the soft voice that once guided her small hands across the keys. She remembered the songs that used to fill their little house with laughter. Back then, music wasn't just sound, it was love, comfort, and safety. It was her mother's way of speaking to her heart. But after her mother's passing, the music had stopped. The piano at home was covered with a sheet, untouched, silent like the rooms around it. That silence had followed her everywhere. Every time she saw a piano, she turned away. But yesterday, when she was forced to sit and touch those keys again, something deep inside her stirred. It was as if her heart had opened a small window she had long shut. She didn't know the head of the music department had noticed her deeply. That man had spent decades teaching music and had met many students with skill, but very few with emotion. What he saw in her brief touch stayed in his mind. Later that day, he spoke with the teacher who had encouraged her to play. "She has something," he said quietly. You saw the way she touched the keys? There's emotion there. Real emotion, the teacher nodded. She was nervous. I didn't want to push her too hard. But maybe you're right. I'd like to talk to her again, he said with a small smile. Not as a teacher, but as someone who loves music. The next day after class, the young lady was about to leave when she heard someone call her. She turned and saw the same man from the music department standing at the doorway. His expression was kind, not strict like most teachers. Do you have a moment? He asked gently. She hesitated but nodded. He led her into the music room where the piano waited quietly. He didn't tell her to play. Instead, he sat beside her on another chair and said, You have a gentle way of touching the keys. It's rare. Most people strike the piano. You listen to it. She looked down. I haven't played in a long time, she said softly. He nodded slowly. Sometimes time doesn't take talent away. It only hides it until the right moment comes. He paused and asked, Why did you stop? Her eyes grew distant. She hesitated, unsure if she could speak about it. But something in his calm tone made her feel safe. My mother used to teach me, she said. She loved music. She said every note had its own heart. But after she left, I couldn't play anymore. Her voice trembled slightly. The man didn't interrupt. He just listened with quiet respect. She used to sit beside me and guide my hands. I tried to play alone after she was gone, but it didn't feel right. It hurt too much, he nodded gently. I understand. Sometimes music carries memories that are too heavy to bear. But remember, music also heals. It keeps the memory alive in a kinder way. She didn't answer, but his words stayed with her. He stood up and smiled softly. You don't have to play for anyone right now. Just promise me something. When you feel ready, come back here and play for yourself. She nodded faintly. Maybe. That evening she returned home quietly. The house was small but peaceful. In one corner of the living room stood an old upright piano, covered with a white cloth. She hadn't uncovered it in years. As she looked at it, her heart felt heavy, but something inside her whispered that maybe it was time. She hesitated, then slowly walked toward it. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the cloth. Dust rose into the air and she coughed softly. The keys looked old, slightly yellowed, but they still carried the same familiar pattern she remembered from childhood. She sat down, her knees shaking a little. Her reflection appeared faintly on the piano's surface. For a few seconds she just sat there, remembering the sound of her mother's laughter, the warmth of her presence, and the way she used to hum softly while teaching her. Without realizing it, her fingers moved toward the keys. She pressed one gently. The sound was soft, a little out of tune, but it felt like a voice she hadn't heard in a long time. Tears welled up in her eyes. She played another note, then another. Soon a small melody formed, broken, uncertain, but filled with emotion. She stopped suddenly, covering her face with her hands. The pain was still there, but it was mixed with something new. Peace. Maybe this was what the teacher had meant by healing. Over the next few days, she began visiting the piano after school. At first, she only played for a few minutes, but soon, she started losing track of time. Each note helped her breathe easier. Each melody brought her closer to the memory of her mother, but this time it didn't hurt as much. It felt like a gentle conversation across time. Meanwhile, the music teacher and the department head talked again. She's been coming here after class, the teacher said. I saw her sitting in the music room alone yesterday. The older man smiled. Good, don't disturb her. Let her find her rhythm in her own time. As days passed, other students began noticing small changes in her. She smiled a little more. She seemed lighter, more at peace. But she still didn't talk much. Some curious classmates peeked into the music room once and saw her sitting at the piano, her fingers moving softly over the keys. They didn't recognize the tune, but it was beautiful. They didn't interrupt. One afternoon, while she was playing quietly, the head of the music department entered the room. She didn't notice at first. Her eyes were closed, her hands moving gently. When she finally looked up and saw him, she froze. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean to use the piano without permission. He smiled kindly. You never need permission to create music, he said. That was beautiful. She blushed slightly. It's just something I remember. A piece my mother taught me. He nodded. Would you like to learn again? Properly, I can help you. Not for grades, not for a performance. Just to let you grow with it again. She hesitated, then looked at the piano. I don't know if I can play like before, he smiled. You don't need to. You only need to play like yourself. Something about that answer made her nod slowly. All right, she said quietly. From that day on, they met twice a week after school. The sessions weren't formal lessons. They were more like quiet conversations between two people connected by music. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. He would sit beside her, gently correcting her posture or helping her find the right notes. Other times he would share stories of his own youth, how he had once lost his passion for music and found it again. Those moments gave her comfort. She realized that pain and beauty often existed side by side in every melody. As weeks passed, her confidence grew. Her fingers moved more freely, her tone stronger, her touch softer but more expressive. She didn't realize how far she had come until one day the teacher from her class entered the room and stopped in her tracks. The sound that filled the space was rich, emotional, and full of life. The teacher looked at the department head with wide eyes. He only smiled. I told you, he whispered. She has something special. The young lady didn't notice them at first. She was lost in her music, her face calm, her body relaxed. It was the same song her mother had taught her when she was little, the one she hadn't been able to play since the day she lost her. Now she was playing it again and it felt right. When the final note faded, she looked up and saw them standing there. She froze for a second, unsure how to react. But instead of embarrassment, she saw pride in their eyes. That was wonderful, the teacher said softly. Truly beautiful. The young lady looked down shyly but smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small one that said she was finally starting to believe in herself again. That day marked the real beginning of her return to music. The pain was still there, but now it was part of her song. And though she didn't know it yet, her quiet journey would soon surprise not only her teachers but everyone who ever doubted the quiet girl in the back of the room. Days turned into weeks, and the young lady's quiet connection with music began to grow stronger. The once nervous, hesitant student was slowly transforming into someone who could express deep emotions through every note she played. Each afternoon after school, she would sit at the piano, lost in melodies that spoke what words could not. Her teachers had stopped interrupting her practice. They simply listened from afar, amazed by the change they saw in her. Her confidence, however, was still delicate. She didn't play to impress anyone. She played because it felt like breathing again after being silent for too long. The sound of the piano was no longer heavy with pain. It had become a friend, a reminder that her mother's love still lived within every note. But she never imagined that her small private practices would soon catch more attention than she ever expected. One afternoon, while she was practicing a soft, emotional piece, two students walked past the open door of the music room. The gentle sound caught their attention. They peeked inside and saw her sitting at the piano, her eyes closed, fingers moving gracefully. The melody was so heartfelt that both students stood frozen for a moment. When she finished, they quietly clapped. Startled, she turned around, her cheeks flushing. I'm sorry, she said quickly, standing up. I didn't know anyone was there. One of them smiled and said, That was amazing. You should play for everyone. She shook her head. No, I can't, but word spread fast. The next day, a few more students came to listen. They didn't laugh or whisper like before. They sat quietly, listening. For the first time, the young lady realized that maybe her music was touching others the way it once touched her. Still, the idea of performing in front of a crowd scared her. That week, the school announced the annual talent showcase. It was an event where students could perform music, dance, or other creative acts. The teacher immediately thought of her and mentioned her name in the staff meeting. She should perform, the teacher said. The way she plays, it's different. It's real. The head of the music department agreed but said softly, Let's not pressure her. She needs to come to it on her own. The next day, during her lesson, he mentioned the event casually. You know, the showcase is coming up. Have you ever thought about performing? She froze for a moment, her fingers resting on the keys. I don't think I can, she said quietly. Why not? He asked kindly. I don't want everyone looking at me, she said. I'm not ready. He smiled gently. Music doesn't ask for an audience. It asks for honesty. If you play with honesty, it won't matter who's watching. They'll just feel it. She thought about his words but still hesitated. The memory of that first day when everyone laughed at her was still fresh in her mind. The fear of failure lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake off. At home that evening, she sat by her old piano, thinking about the offer. The house was quiet and the night air felt soft. She touched the keys lightly, letting her fingers wander through familiar notes. Somewhere deep inside, she felt her mother's presence again. The same gentle encouragement she used to hear as a child. Play your heart, not the notes. Tears welled up in her eyes. Maybe it was time, not to prove herself, but to share what she had kept hidden for so long. The next morning, she went to find the head of the music department. When she entered his office, he looked up from his papers and smiled. "Good morning," he said. "Is something on your mind?" She nodded slowly. "About the showcase. I think I want to try." His face lit up. "That's wonderful news. I'll help you prepare. We'll take it one step at a time." The following weeks were filled with quiet preparation. She and her mentor worked patiently, refining her technique, choosing the right piece, and focusing on expression more than perfection. The song she chose was one her mother used to play, a piece full of love and longing. Every time she practiced, it felt like she was having one last conversation with her mother. Sometimes she would get frustrated. Her hands would tremble, or she'd make small mistakes that made her frown. But her teacher always encouraged her. "Don't fight the music," he would say. "Let it flow. It doesn't have to be flawless, it just has to be true." As the day of the showcase approached, her nerves grew stronger. The school auditorium, which once felt warm and familiar, now seemed huge and intimidating. She would sit there sometimes after class, staring at the stage, imagining herself under the lights. The idea made her stomach twist. But deep down, she knew she couldn't back out. On the morning of the performance, she could barely eat breakfast. Her hands were cold, her heart racing. She arrived early at the school and walked straight to the music room. The piano was waiting, quiet and calm, like an old friend. She sat and began playing softly just to steady her nerves. The teacher walked in and listened for a while before speaking. "You're ready," he said simply. She stopped and looked at him nervously. "What if I forget everything?" He smiled. "Then start again. The piano will wait for you. It always does." His words comforted her in a strange way. For a few moments, she sat silently looking at the piano. Then she took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay." When evening came, the auditorium filled with students, teachers, and parents. The room buzzed with excitement. Performers took turns, singers, dancers, musicians, all receiving cheers and applause. She waited backstage, her heart pounding harder with each passing moment. When her name was finally called, she froze for a second. The lights from the stage seemed too bright, and the sound of applause felt distant. She wanted to turn back, but something inside whispered, "You can do this." She walked slowly to the piano. The audience grew quiet. Her hands trembled as she sat on the bench. For a moment, she just looked at the keys, her reflection faintly visible. She could almost hear her mother's voice again, calm and kind. "Close your eyes and listen to your heart," so she did. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes were soft, almost like a whisper. Then the melody grew, filled with emotion that reached every corner of the auditorium. Each note carried her story, her pain, her love, her memories. She wasn't playing for the audience anymore. She was playing for her mother, for herself, for the music that had once been silent inside her. The teachers who had once doubted her sat speechless. The students who had laughed before were now silent, their eyes fixed on her. The music wasn't just beautiful, it was alive. It made people feel something they couldn't describe. As she reached the final part of the song, her hands moved with confidence and grace. The melody swelled with power, then slowly faded into a soft, peaceful ending. When the last note echoed through the hall, she lifted her hands gently off the keys. There was silence for a heartbeat, then thunderous applause. The audience stood up, clapping, cheering. Some teachers wiped away tears. The young lady sat there, stunned. She couldn't believe it. The sound of their applause didn't feel like pressure anymore. It felt like warmth, like acceptance. The head of the music department stood at the side of the stage, smiling proudly. The teacher who had first encouraged her looked on, her eyes shining. For them, it wasn't just about the performance. It was about the transformation. The shy girl who once said, "I can't play," was now standing before them as a true musician. She stood up slowly, bowed slightly, and walked off the stage. Backstage, she finally let out a shaky breath. Her hands still trembled, but her heart felt light, almost weightless. She had done it. When she saw her teacher waiting, she smiled, a real, genuine smile. "You were right," she whispered. Music doesn't ask for an audience. He chuckled softly. And yet, when it's honest, everyone listens. That night she went home and sat by her old piano once more. She didn't play a grand song. Just a simple tune, soft, steady, filled with peace. For the first time in years she felt whole, and though she couldn't see her mother, she could almost feel her beside her, smiling proudly. From that day on, she wasn't just the quiet girl in the back of the class. She was someone who had found her voice again through music. What began as fear had turned into strength, and the piano that once brought her sorrow now carried her hope. After the showcase, the young lady's life at school began to change. The same hallways that once felt cold and distant now greeted her with warmth. Students who had once ignored her now smiled when she passed. Some even stopped to tell her how beautiful her performance had been. She wasn't used to attention, and though it made her nervous at first, there was a quiet joy growing inside her. For the first time she felt seen, not because she tried to impress anyone, but because she had finally shared something true. The teachers, too, treated her differently. They no longer saw a shy student who avoided the spotlight. They saw someone with rare depth. The head of the music department often spoke proudly of her performance to his colleagues. "That kind of emotion," he said one afternoon, "isn't something you can teach. It comes from the heart." Yet for her, the attention didn't change much. She still came early to school and stayed late, practicing quietly in the same music room. The piano had become her safe place. Each day she would explore new melodies, experimenting with sound and emotion. Sometimes she played softly as if whispering a secret. Other times her music filled the entire room with power and passion. Every note was like a piece of her story, slowly being told through music. One afternoon, the teacher who had once asked her to play during class walked in while she was practicing. She listened quietly from the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. The melody the young lady played was unfamiliar, gentle yet full of longing. When she finally finished, the teacher clapped softly. The girl turned around and smiled shyly. "I didn't hear you come in." The teacher stepped closer. "You're improving every day." "That was beautiful. Did you write that yourself?" She nodded. "It just came to me. I don't know how. I just played what I felt." The teacher smiled warmly. "That's what real musicians do. They don't just play, they speak through their music." The girl blushed slightly. "It feels like my mother is helping me sometimes," she said softly. "Like she's guiding my hands." The teacher's eyes softened. "Maybe she is. Some love never leaves us." In the following weeks, she began writing down her music in a small notebook. She didn't know how to read or write notes perfectly, but she used her own way, letters, symbols, and small drawings to remember melodies. That notebook became her treasure, something she carried everywhere. During free periods, she would hum softly to herself, shaping new ideas that she would later play on the piano. One day, as she was leaving school, the head of the music department stopped her. "Do you have a moment?" he asked kindly. She nodded, curious. "I've been thinking," he began. "There's a regional youth music festival next month. It's not a competition, just a gathering of young musicians from different schools. They perform and share their work. I think you should go." Her eyes widened. "Me?" she asked softly. "But I've never played anywhere else." "I'm not ready for that," he smiled gently. "You were ready long before you believed it. You just needed to find your courage." She hesitated, the thought of playing in front of strangers making her heart race. But deep inside, she also felt something else, curiosity. Maybe this was another step forward. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. Over the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about the festival. At night, she would sit by her piano at home, imagining what it would be like to perform again. Her mother's photo sat on the shelf nearby, smiling as always. Sometimes she whispered to it as if seeking approval. "Do you think I can do it?" she would ask softly. The silence of the room seemed to answer her with calmness. A week later, she found herself standing in the music office again. "I'll do it," she said simply. The head of the department's face lit up. "I'm proud of you. Let's prepare something special." Together, they chose a piece she had written herself, a soft, emotional composition that blended memory and hope. Every afternoon, she practiced it until her fingers knew it by heart. The music wasn't just a song. It was her story told through sound. Her teacher would sometimes close his eyes and listen, moved every time. "You have a gift," he said once after she finished playing. Not just for music, but for touching people's hearts. She looked down shyly. I just play what I feel. And that's exactly why it's powerful, he replied. When the day of the festival came, she woke up early. The sky was clear, and the morning light poured into her room. She wore a simple dress and tied her hair neatly. As she looked in the mirror, she whispered, "For you, Mama." Then she smiled faintly and left. The event was held at a large auditorium in another city. Dozens of students from different schools had gathered there. Some tuned their instruments nervously. Others chatted excitedly. She sat quietly in a corner, holding her small notebook close. Her school teachers were there too, encouraging her gently. When it was finally her turn, she walked to the stage. Her steps were slow but steady. The audience, made up of students, parents, and judges, waited patiently. She sat at the grand piano, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. The moment she began to play, time seemed to stop. The first notes were soft, like a whisper from the past. Then the melody grew stronger, carrying emotion that filled the entire hall. Her music spoke of love, loss, and courage. Every rise and fall in the tune mirrored her own journey, from silence to expression, from fear to strength. As she played, she could almost see her mother's smile in her mind. It gave her peace. The melody changed from sadness to something brighter, a reflection of hope. By the time she reached the final notes, the audience was completely silent, as if holding their breath. When the last sound faded, there was a pause, a heartbeat of stillness, and then applause erupted. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was heartfelt and loud. People stood up cheering. Some even had tears in their eyes. The young lady sat frozen for a moment, overwhelmed. She looked around, unsure how to react, then slowly stood and bowed. Her heart felt light, almost weightless. As she walked off stage, her teacher met her with a proud smile. "You did it," he said softly. She nodded, her eyes shining. "It felt like she was with me," she whispered. "I'm sure she was," he replied gently. Later that evening, when the festival ended, several teachers and students from other schools came to meet her. They praised her performance, asking about her piece. One music instructor said, "Your music has something special. It's pure. It comes from a real place." She thanked them quietly, humbled by their kindness. She wasn't used to so much attention, but what touched her most was not their praise. It was knowing that her music had reached people's hearts. On the way back home, she sat by the bus window watching the city lights pass by. The applause still echoed in her mind, but she didn't think of fame or recognition. All she thought about was how far she had come since the day she was too afraid to play a single note. When she reached home that night, she went straight to the piano. The room was silent except for the soft creak of the chair as she sat down. She didn't turn on the lights. The moonlight was enough. Slowly, she began to play again. This time, a soft lullaby her mother used to hum. It was gentle, filled with love. Her eyes closed as tears rolled down her cheeks, but she smiled through them. For her, the journey was not about proving anything to anyone. It was about healing, about finding herself again through the music that once broke her heart and now made it whole. From that day, her story spread quietly among students and teachers, not as a tale of talent, but of courage. The shy girl who once said she couldn't play had taught everyone a simple truth. Sometimes the quietest souls carry the loudest songs. The days after the music festival passed like a dream. The young lady's school was buzzing with excitement. Everyone talked about her performance, how her music had touched the audience and made even strangers emotional. The teachers were proud, the students curious, and she herself still couldn't fully believe what had happened. For her, it wasn't about being famous or admired. It was about finally feeling that her mother's love had reached others through her. The head of the music department called her to his office a few days later. When she entered, he smiled warmly and offered her a seat. "You did something special," he said softly. "People are still talking about your performance, but more than that, they're talking about how you made them feel." She lowered her eyes, shy but grateful. "I'm happy they liked it," she said quietly. "It's more than that," he replied. "Your music made people remember something. Some said it reminded them of their families, their childhood, their dreams. That's a rare gift." He paused for a moment, then continued. "There's another event coming soon, A charity concert. It's bigger than the festival. Would you be willing to perform there? Her heart skipped a beat. The thought of playing in front of an even larger crowd made her nervous, but she also felt something new inside her, a spark of courage she hadn't known before. "I'll do it," she said after a short silence. The teacher nodded with pride. "Good. We'll prepare together." The following weeks were filled with music, practice, and long afternoons in the empty school hall. Sometimes she practiced alone, lost in the rhythm of the piano. Other times her teacher guided her, helping refine the parts that needed more emotion or balance. They worked not just on the notes, but on the feelings behind each piece. One evening, as she played, the teacher said quietly, "You know, you don't need to be perfect. What makes your music special is that it's honest. Every time you play, people feel your heart. That's something no technique can replace." She smiled softly, understanding what he meant. She had never tried to impress anyone with skill. She just played what she felt. Maybe that was why her music connected with people. At home, she spent hours by her piano, practicing and dreaming. Her small house was simple, but it was filled with warmth and memories. The framed photo of her mother still sat on the shelf, her gentle smile watching over her. Sometimes she would talk to it, sharing her thoughts. "I'm going to play again, Mama," she would whisper. "This time, for people who need hope." As the day of the concert approached, excitement mixed with anxiety. The event would be held at a large community center, and many people would attend, teachers, families, and guests from nearby towns. Posters with her name on them were printed, something she never expected to see. She laughed softly when one of her classmates showed her a flyer. "Look, you're famous now," they teased kindly. She just shook her head with a small smile. Fame wasn't what she wanted. She just hoped to make people feel something real. Finally, the day arrived. The hall was decorated beautifully, lights shining on the polished piano at the center of the stage. As she stood backstage, she could hear the hum of voices, the excitement of the audience waiting. Her hands trembled slightly and she took a deep breath. Her teacher stood beside her, noticing the nervousness in her eyes. "It's okay to be scared," he said gently. "Every great artist feels that way. But remember, when you play, it's just you and the piano. Nothing else matters." She nodded, exhaling slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. When her name was announced, the hall fell quiet. She walked to the stage, her steps careful and steady. The light was bright, and for a moment, it felt like she was stepping into another world. She sat at the piano, her heart beating fast. Then she looked out at the crowd. There were hundreds of faces, some familiar, some not. And among them, she imagined her mother sitting there, smiling as she always had. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The melody was soft at first, like a breeze gently touching the air. Then it grew deeper, fuller, filled with emotion. Each note carried warmth, sadness, and hope all at once. Her hands moved with confidence, guided by feeling rather than thought. The audience sat still, drawn in by the sincerity of her music. There were no flashy moves, no dramatic gestures, just honest emotion pouring out from her heart. Halfway through the piece, something magical happened. The lights seemed to glow, a little warmer, and the room felt completely silent except for the sound of her piano. Even the smallest sound, a breath, a sigh, felt in tune with her music. She closed her eyes, and for a moment it was as if time had stopped. When the last note faded, there was a long, silent pause. Then, the entire hall rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even wiping their eyes. She blinked in surprise, her heart pounding with relief and happiness. She stood slowly and bowed, her smile shy but full of gratitude. Backstage, her teacher was waiting for her with tears in his eyes. "You were incredible," he said. "You didn't just play, you touched every single person in that room." She smiled softly. "I just played what I felt. And that's why they felt it too," he said warmly. After the concert, people approached her, thanking her for her music. Some shared small stories, how her song reminded them of someone they loved, how it gave them comfort. She listened quietly, humbled by their words. Each story meant something special to her. One elderly woman gently held her hand and said, "Child, your music healed something inside me tonight. Never stop playing." The young lady's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded silently. That night, when she finally returned home, the world felt calm. The stars outside seemed brighter, and the night air carried a quiet peace. She sat by her piano again, just as she always did. The applause and praise didn't matter as much as the feeling she carried inside: gratitude, peace, and love. She played a soft tune, something she made up on the spot. It was gentle and full of light, like a conversation between her and the universe. When she finished, she whispered, "Thank you, Mama. I think I understand now." Days turned into weeks, and her story continued to spread. Other schools invited her to perform. Local news wrote small articles about her, and people called her the girl with the golden hands. But she stayed humble, never letting the attention change her. To her, it was never about fame. It was about sharing something real. Her teacher often told others, "She reminds us what music really means. It's not about fame or awards, it's about feeling, about connecting with others." And everyone who met her agreed. As time went on, she began to teach younger students at school, showing them simple melodies, helping them express their feelings through sound. She was patient and gentle, always encouraging them to play from the heart. Many of them admired her not just for her talent, but for her kindness. Sometimes, when she walked past the old music room where it all began, she would smile. She remembered the day she was too afraid to play, the whispers, the pressure, and how everything changed the moment she found courage. That room was no longer a place of fear. It was where her true self had been discovered. One afternoon, as she sat at the piano alone, she thought about how far she had come. The journey wasn't easy, but it had taught her something important: that even the quietest voices can create the loudest echoes when they speak with truth. She began to play again, her music filling the room like sunlight. And though she was alone, she didn't feel lonely. She knew her mother's spirit was always there, listening, smiling, and proud. From that moment on, she made herself a promise to keep playing, not for recognition, not for applause, but to remind people that even in silence there is beauty, and in every heart there is a song waiting to be heard. Months passed, and the young lady's life settled into a rhythm that felt both peaceful and full of purpose. Each morning, she walked through the school gates with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Teachers greeted her warmly, and students smiled when they saw her. It was as if her music had changed not only her own life, but the spirit of everyone around her. The piano room, once a place of pressure and fear, had become her second home. She spent hours there, teaching, practicing, and sometimes just sitting quietly, listening to the soft hum of the strings after a melody faded. The sound gave her comfort, reminding her of how far she had come. One afternoon, while she was helping a younger student learn simple scales, the head of the music department came in. He smiled as he watched her patiently guide the child's small hands. "You have a gift for teaching," he said when the student left. "You make them believe they can do it." She laughed softly. "I just remember how it felt when I was afraid to play. I don't want anyone else to feel that way." The teacher nodded thoughtfully. "That's why you're special. You don't just play music, you share courage." As the months went by, her story began reaching beyond the school. Local communities invited her to perform at small events, often for charity or gatherings that raised awareness for children's education. Every time she performed, she carried her mother's memory with her, letting it shine through every note she played. People would often come up afterward and tell her how her music made them feel at peace. Some said it reminded them of someone they had lost. Others said it gave them hope. One evening, after performing at a small community concert, she stood by the piano as people slowly left the hall. A middle-aged man approached her, holding his little daughter's hand. He looked emotional as he said, "My wife used to play the piano before she passed away. When I heard you tonight, it felt like she was in the room again." "Thank you." The young lady smiled softly, her eyes shining. "I'm happy my music brought you that feeling," she said quietly. As he left, she sat down at the piano once more, playing a few gentle notes. Her heart felt full. For her, moments like these mattered more than any applause. They were reminders that music could heal hearts, even ones that had been silent for too long. Weeks later, the school received an invitation for a national music showcase. It wasn't a competition, but an opportunity for young musicians from across the country to perform and share their talent. The head of the music department approached her again, a hopeful smile on his face. "You've touched so many hearts here," he said. "It's time to let the world hear your story. Will you go?" The thought made her nervous, but she also felt ready. "Yes," she said after a moment. "I'll go." The following weeks were busy with preparation. She wanted to play something meaningful, something that told her story completely. She decided to compose a new piece, a melody that would carry both her pain and her joy, her loss and her growth. Each night she worked on it in her small room, writing down new parts in her old notebook, the same one she had carried since the beginning. The piece began softly, almost like a whisper, then grew into a powerful yet gentle melody that reflected every chapter of her journey. It was personal, but she knew others would feel it too. As the day of the performance approached, she felt a calm determination inside her. She wasn't afraid anymore. When the big day finally arrived, she traveled with her teacher and a few classmates to the city where the showcase was held. The venue was large, with bright lights and hundreds of people in the audience. Musicians from many different schools were there, each preparing to share their music. The energy in the hall was alive with excitement. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage, her heart steady. The grand piano stood under the soft spotlight. She took a deep breath and looked around the hall. For a brief second, she imagined her mother sitting in the crowd, smiling proudly. That image gave her strength. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The opening notes were delicate, floating through the hall like a soft breeze. Then the melody deepened, carrying emotion that filled every corner of the room. Her music spoke without words. It told of a young girl once too scared to play, of a teacher who believed in her, of a mother's love that never faded, and of the courage it takes to share one's heart with the world. The audience sat completely silent, drawn into her world. The sound of the piano seemed to tell everyone something different: hope, love, loss, peace. Each listener found a piece of their own story in her song. As she reached the final notes, the melody softened again, returning to the gentle tone it began with. The last sound lingered for a moment before fading into silence. For a heartbeat, the hall was completely still. Then came the applause, strong, endless, heartfelt. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Some wiped their eyes. Her teacher stood backstage, proud beyond words. The young lady bowed deeply, tears glimmering in her eyes. She felt something more powerful than pride. It was peace. She had given her all, and that was enough. After the performance, as she walked off stage, several musicians and organizers came to congratulate her. One of them, an older woman who worked as a music mentor, said kindly, "Your music doesn't just sound beautiful, it feels honest. You have something rare, something real. Never lose that." She smiled humbly. "Thank you," she said softly. When she returned home a few days later, the town welcomed her warmly. Students gathered around her at school, full of excitement. But she didn't act any different. She still spent her mornings in the piano room, practicing quietly, guiding the younger ones, and sometimes just sitting by the window lost in thought. One day after class, her teacher asked her to stay for a moment. He handed her a small envelope. "This came for you," he said. She opened it carefully and found a handwritten letter inside. It was from one of the audience members at the showcase. The letter read, "I was in the crowd the day you played. I don't know your story, but your music helped me forgive someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Thank you for reminding me what love sounds like." She read the letter twice, her eyes misty. She folded it gently and placed it inside her notebook, beside the pages of her music. That letter became a reminder of why she played, to touch lives, even those she'd never meet. Years later, she would continue playing, composing, and teaching. The small girl who once trembled at the piano became a woman whose music healed others. Her journey wasn't about fame or perfection. It was about courage, kindness, and truth. Sometimes, during quiet evenings, she still sat at her piano alone. The house would be filled with the soft glow of the setting sun, and the familiar warmth of her mother's presence would surround her. She would play the same melody she had once played in the empty school hall, the one that changed everything. The notes felt like home, and as her fingers danced gently across the keys, she often smiled, whispering softly to herself, "I was afraid once, but I found my voice." Her story became something people shared, not as a tale of talent, but of transformation. The girl who had once been forced to play showed the world that sometimes the greatest gifts are hidden behind silence. And when that silence finally breaks, it becomes music that lives forever in the hearts of those who hear it.